Hi there, welcome once again to the 2013 Film Blog, and today's discussion is all about the new film by Pedro Almodovar. I'm so excited. In the world of the art house film goer, there are certain names in cinema who you will see by a film and we will just watch them regardless. There are the likes of, say, Woody Allen is a major one, Lars von Trier, and of course the mighty Almodovar, whose last two films have been rather interesting old pieces. We had Broken Embraces with Pedro Cruz in 2009, and then in 2011 he came back with the rather terrifying The Skin I Live In with Antonio Banderas. And he's now back 2 years later on with a comedy, which is a bit of a strange old thing for him to be engaged with, but we'll go with it. And there's quite an interesting little praise scene at the start in which he casts briefly his last two leading actors, Banderas and Cruz, in a sort of vague vignette at the start to explain sort of why we get where we get. So, first things first, in terms of the actual film and what it's about. Ostensibly, this is the tale of a plane that is going from Spain to Mexico, full of various passengers, flight crew, attendants, all this kind of thing. And in the opening vignette, we see Antonio Banderas pulling the chocks away from the plane wheels. And we also see Penelope Cruz, his girlfriend, driving across the forecourt with a baggage trolley, which she unfortunately then runs into somebody. Banderas runs across to try and help her and mistakenly does not remove the last chock, and so when the plane takes off, the chock is absorbed into the engine and the landing gear now will not come down, therefore there is no way the plane can land. Now, rather than telling all the passengers this, the pilots instead decide to have the plane spin round and round and round in circles over Spain, whilst getting the cabin crew to drug all the passengers in economy class, and this now leaves 3 stewards who are left to entertain everyone in business class, who are increasingly getting more and more angry. And sort of what descends is sort of the classic closed room farce of various strange, weird and wonderful characters who are all in business class being looked after by these 3 air stewards. And we sort of see over the course of the film everyone's lives, everyone's business is suddenly brought to the fore, and everyone's lives suddenly intersect, intercross, and it's rather well done. I'll admit it's not the kind of thing that you'd normally expect to see in an Almodovar film, particularly given his last 2, which have been exceptionally dark. And more to the point, in his last 2 films, there's been a whole ethos around sexual relations between characters generally being used as one character to dominate somebody else and exact vengeance. Whereas in this one, there is still an awful lot of sex going on, but it's not done in the same way. It's more of an amusement, an aside. It's not done in the same way as it has been done in his previous films. And that's a bit of a strange decision for him to make. I'd say right from the start that what this is, as a comedy, it's a lot more difficult to make a great comedy than it is to make a great drama. Because the point is that tragedy is tragedy. What's tragic in the past is tragic today. Whereas comedy tends to date quite badly. And what's funny to one person may not be funny to somebody else, whereas what's tragic to one person generally is tragic to everyone. So comedy in itself is a difficult thing to get right. If we say that the measure of a good comedy is to make you laugh, then certainly he's done that. There were plenty of laughs to be had at the film. But does it stay with you for days afterwards like his previous films have? No, it doesn't. I've been reading recently some interviews with Almodovar in which he tries to explain what the film is about. And essentially, what he claims the film is about is it's to do with the current economic situation in Spain as it stands. All these passengers in business class are the wealthy elite who are now being driven out of Spain because there is no money left in the country. You've got the embezzling banker, you've got the dominatrix whose clientele have dried up, you've got the clairvoyant who's off to make her fortune in Mexico because no one can anymore afford anything but the necessities in Spain. And I see what he's trying to get at, which basically is that these are the people who've caused all the problems in Spain, and they're now just sitting above it all, spinning round and round and round, while all those in the economy class, who, through no fault of their own, being embroiled in this, are effectively drugged, can't see what's happening. So he's trying to suggest that it's basically a microcosm of what's happened in Spain over the last sort of decade and how they've now got to the situation in which they have got. Now, it's not my place to say whether or not he's right or wrong. It's his film. If he says that's what it's about, then that's what it's about. For me, watching the film, until I read his comments later on, I didn't personally see that parallel within and of itself. What I saw was more interesting from where I was. It sort of, at times, this does strike me as a very, very sort of Woody Allen kind of setup, in that you've got this enclosed space and all these bizarre characters who have got all these intertwining lives. It's very much like if anyone saw From Rome with Love last year, Woody Allen's newest film, in which he has sort of 4 small stories, and all of them intersecting one another across the city. That's sort of what you see here, is you've got all these different stories intersected by the fact they're all left in the same cabin. But I suppose, ultimately, what the film, to me, seemed to be all about was the nature of truth. Because not a single character in this film is not concealing within themselves some kind of hidden truth, something that they're refusing to admit to somebody else. And the fact is that everybody else, or at least somebody else, knows what it is they're hiding. So, for example, you've got the gay pilot who's sleeping with the head steward. Now, he thinks that no one knows this. By the end, the head steward has told the entire cabin, and it also transpires that his wife knows about it. It's happening. So, that's a good example of like what I'm talking about here, is that everyone sort of has their secrets, but they aren't really secrets. And this perhaps is what he's trying to get at within the film, is to try and say that the best kept secrets are those that are in plain sight. And that's what's been happening, supposedly, in Spain for the last decade. You've got all these bankers who have been secretly squirreling away money, supposedly, in plain sight. And they're the ones who are being deceptive. And yet everyone knew what they were doing, and yet no one actually pointed out to them what they were doing was wrong. And now, when it all comes crashing down, this is what you're left with. Another storyline features the co-pilot, who, at the start of the film, it's said is straight, and he ends the film basically in a pile of foam with, we assume, one of the stewards, because he's been spending the entire film trying to understand who he truly is. And again, it's a nice little storyline, but again, it doesn't really go properly. This is what you really want, is to, by having such a scattergun approach to all these characters, none of them really engage you too much. I mean, I guess you're supposed to be properly engaged by the head steward, but I think no one really is, because he spends the entire flight basically just getting drunk and taking drugs by himself, and you can't really feel any kind of amenity for any of these characters, because they're all dreadful. None of them particularly nice people. And all they've done is they've now basically drugged an entire cabin full of other passengers who are now basically just ignored. I mean, at one point, they make a cocktail full of various drugs and drink, and they get one of the slightly worse characters, which is a sort of psychic, and she decides that what she's going to do on this flight is she's had a premonition that on this flight she will lose her virginity. And so once she's had all her drink and drugs, she goes back into economy class and effectively rapes the gentleman who's back there. I mean, at times it's reminiscent of that scene in Kids when, right at the end, the guy rapes the girl. That's what it was like. It's utterly horrendous. And I'm thinking, that's not funny. And then at the end, they get together. And I think, this is just, it's lazy. And it's not funny, and it's not acceptable. Why are you putting that on my screen to say it's a comedy? And the weird thing is, other parts of it work so well. And they are funny. I mean, sort of, a lot of the comedy is done with a very, very broad brush, but, you know, that's some people's taste. I mean, I feel kind of bad comparing this film with something like Woody Allen, because it's so far sub-Woody Allen, it's untrue. I mean, Almodovar is an amazing filmmaker. He can make amazing films. He can totally inspire you, totally terrify you. And I don't really understand why he's making this, because it's a film that's not really worthy of him. I mean, you bear in mind, 2 years ago, this is the guy that brought us The Skin I Live In, one of the most original and incredible horror movies for years. And he's now producing this. I understand to an extent what he's saying is that it is a pastiche, it is a microcosm of current Spanish society. But it doesn't seem to work on every level. I mean, what is he trying to suggest here? Is he trying to say that effectively these people in business class who are rich, they are the rapists of the poor? Which is, it's something to say, but the problem is there's no one there to act on behalf of the poor, because everyone who is supposedly poor is currently drugged up and asleep in standard class. The only people who are any character are the people in business class, who are supposedly this decade of Spaniards who have destroyed the country. So why are we watching an entire film about these people who have destroyed the country, and yet not being given anybody else on the other side to actually sympathise with me? No one here is sympathetic. They're all horrible. Every single one of them has done something wrong. And yet, by weird, twisted routes, they all end up basically just having a massive orgy while singing songs by the Punch Sisters. It's infuriating. And the weird thing is, I laughed. And it is, at points, it's really funny. And yet it's when you look at it afterwards and think, wait a minute, that was badly done. That was horrendously misjudged. And yet there are times when the jokes, they hit spot on. And the fact that you've got this mass repression, and you've got them all confined together in this small space, and everyone, you can feel the sexual tension sort of springing round the cabin, because everyone wants to sleep with everybody else, which is fair enough, but it doesn't make for a great film, and it doesn't, for me, make for the story that Almodovar wanted to tell, which was about the crash in Spain. Literally all this tells us is that people who are rich get away with it, because ultimately nobody suffers for what they've done. We end up with all the loose ends getting tied up nicely. The only person who even vaguely has some kind of weapons is the banker, and even that we don't see off screen. So, what's he trying to say? Is he trying to say that you can't escape from your country, you'll just end up spinning round and round in the air for hours and then they come down the same place? They're still there, they go over it. Everyone who's done this has go over it. Or is what he's trying to say ultimately that? Is it a screed on the politicians to say, these people have ruined our country and go away with it. The point is that his message, it's not clear. And the fact is that the film isn't clever enough and doesn't engage you enough to make you want to try and work out what the message is, to try and read into it too deeply what it is. Because all these characters are so unpleasant, so unbelievably vile to each other, that you don't want to know. I mean, yeah, they're funny. They're funny characters. It's a funny film. But ultimately, at times, you sort of leave and you think, this is a guy who, every time I see his name on a poster, I think, yeah, I want to watch that. And I just sort of left feeling, ultimately, quite disappointed. It's sort of, I know there were a lot of people who felt this way, to bring it back once again to Woody Allen, with Whatever Works, which personally I love, but I know there were a lot of people there who watched that, and sort of every year now, Woody Allen puts out a film, and the critics tend to just all come around and say, what a surprise, it's not Match Point, it's not The Christian of Barcelona, it's not Annie Hall. What a surprise, he's not making amazing films every time. But the fact is that what Woody Allen turns out time to time is a good deal funnier and a good deal more insightful than what Almodovar has done here. I would suggest that Almodovar needs to go back to doing drama, because that's what he's good at. Have this occasionally as a break, feel free. But I would hope in 2 years, with his next film, what we see is, once again, amazing, gritty dramas, like Broken Embraces, like Skin I Live In. These amazing films. Let's see sort of less of this, because, yeah, it's a comedy. It's a superior comedy, bearing in mind that at the moment in cinemas there are things like Scary Movie 5 out, which apparently is for the comedy. No one knows why. This, in comparison to that, it's a superior comedy. But what it is not is a superior art house film. It is not a film that makes you think it's changed your life in any kind of way. It's not a film you go, oh wow, I was that again. It was just a pleasant enough way to spend a few hours. And I think if this is the guy who's previously brought you The Skin I Live In, which was such an amazing, groundbreaking film, and he's gone from that to this, I would say, please, Pedro, go back to the dramas. Go back to doing what you do best. Go back to your twisted tales that scared the life out of us, and leave the comedy be. It's okay, but you're better than this. And I'll see you soon. Ta-ra.